Hello, Breaking Brown family. Hello, Your Black World family. And I just wanted to take a moment out quickly to talk about the terrorist attacks in France. And more than to talk about the terrorist attacks, I want to talk about the response to the attacks in the sense of, you know, hashtags and Facebook profile pictures and the controversy that's really kind of broiling in the black community in terms of how should black and brown people who have, you know, largely been exploited by the French government from the carving up of the Middle East. We saw, let's not forget what happened in Haiti, how they, you know, the slaves. Let's not forget about how people in France are treated. You know, black people in France are treated. Arabs in France are treated. So this is a conversation that we should probably have. And let me just tell you off the bat how I feel. I don't feel that a black person should overlay their Facebook profile pic with the French flag. Now, I'm not saying that a profile pic is a big deal, is social media, is BS. But I feel that a black person who does that is basically acting as a proxy for propaganda. I feel that that's what's happening. And let me tell you exactly why. It's one thing to express empathy for the people who were hurt in that attack. It's another thing to overlay your profile picture with the flag of a country that has doled out so much pain and suffering to black and brown people across the globe. Those are two very different things. Two very different things. And let me just point out, you know, the people, as far as I'm concerned, who were damaged in that attack, you know, you hear French officials come out and say France was attacked because blah, blah, blah. Really and truthfully, the people who were hurt weren't all of France. Well, the nation wasn't hurt. The nation is intact. The people who were hurt were the people who had family that died in that attack, who they will never see again. Those were the people who were hurt. The elite in that country, the politicians in that country, they weren't hurt, and they're not going to be hurt by this. So that's sort of a feigning of affection. But let's just bring it home real quick. The most interesting thing that I've read today was an article by someone in the Washington Post, and you can look it up, and it's on my personal Facebook page. And the guy basically says, you know, we shouldn't be policing grief. You know, people are allowed to feel how they want to feel. And we shouldn't tell people how they should feel about what happened in Beirut, where there was also a terror attack that nobody paid any attention to. And we shouldn't be telling people how they should feel about the French terror attacks. And let me just say something. I knew that was gonna be an article that was gonna explain away, you know, racism and how, you know, the polar difference in terms of how we respond to black and brown death and how we respond to white death. I knew that article was coming. But the way this guy tried to rationalize it as if it was somehow just common sense that we would react this way to France because France, this is not expected. And, you know, Beirut is basically a war zone. And, you know, these are all these complicated things. And I just want to say empathy is not really that complicated. You know, if you go outside right now, if you're a white person, let me talk to white people. If you go outside right now and a white woman gets robbed and your heart goes out to her, you go and you pick her up and you go to the police and you serve as a witness. But then you get on a plane and you go to Kenya and you see a black woman get robbed. And you kind of shoulder shrug and you feel bad. Isn't that awful? But you don't lift a finger to help. You don't take her to the police station. You don't do any of the things that you did for that white woman, for that black woman. I'm here to tell you that you're racist. No, it's not about, well, you know, there are differences and people grieve differently. No, you saw two people go through the exact same circumstances and you responded in two different ways. That makes you a racist. It's sort of like responding to a black person and white people in employment, right? Let's say a black person comes in late and you assume that black person must have been out partying and, you know, is irresponsible. But if a white person comes to work late, you say, oh, you know, it happens. You know, it happens to the best of us. These sorts of things happen. No big deal, Tommy. Go back to work. That's racism. It may not be the kind of racism where you call somebody the N-word, but it's still racism. And in terms of black life, what is bothering me is that you know, the guy goes on to say something else that's equally dumb. He says, well, you know, if you know what happened in Beirut, because it's so close to Syria, people expected this. Most people can't even point out, most Americans, not say most people, most Americans can't even point out Beirut on a map. They're not going to, they weren't responding to Beirut the way they responded to Beirut because it's a war zone or because it's near Syria. They were responding because they don't care about what happens to people in Beirut. They do care about what happens to people in Paris. And it doesn't escape me that those people don't look alike. So I just wanted to kind of put that in perspective. And that's why I don't think it's a good idea for black and brown people to kind of to overlay their flags, you know, these French flags on their Facebook status. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as to why you would ever put the flag of that nation state up. You can empathize and your heart can go out to the people who were hurt. But this nation has committed so many atrocities that it's never answered for. And people tell us, well, you know, now is not the time. Well, when are we going to talk about it? When are we going to have this conversation about how people and their lives and their families are viewed differently? Is that a conversation we're going to have or no? And how long are we, a people of color, whether you be Latinos or African Americans or Africans or regardless, how long are we going to allow this to continue? And just, you know, it's, you know, every time, you know, you feel almost if you're manipulated into every time something happens to white people, you're forced to go in solidarity. I'm here with you in solidarity. Well, when are you going to be here with us in solidarity? That's the question, you know, and that's the question that you have to answer. And before we start talking all this talk again about how we're all in this together, that's the question that I need answered. If we're all in this together, where are you when I need you? When the Kenyan terror attacks and the Nigerian terror attacks, where are you? Where is your empathy? You all remember during the Hunger Games, there was this huge controversy when in the movie Rue was shown to be a black person, right? So people were outraged, and people were like, why is that outrage? Well, I understand, because in the book, this was a very sympathetic character. These white people read the book, and where it says that she was brown, it talked about her being brown. They read this book, but they still read her as white because they couldn't have empathy for this black girl. And this has real life consequences. You see kids in the ER, black kids who don't get as much medicine as white kids. You see like what happened to Tamir Rice. There was a study not too long ago that showed that the white people in the study participants usually thought of black kids as much older than their white counterparts, right? We see so many of these. You saw there was another article not too long ago about how when in bad economies, you know, white people aren't going through the HR process. They're taking care of their friends. They're taking care of the people who are close to them. We're not in a meritocracy. So you see how this selective grieving impacts people. You see how this collective grieving impacts communities. You see how it entrenches itself and becomes systemic racism. So anybody who tells you that people just grieve differently and that's just how it is just telling you a bold-faced lie. If you grieve differently in the sense that you grieve for white people more than you grieve for people of color in similar circumstances, then you're not just grieving differently, you're racist. And that's something that you should probably deal with. And that's something that we all have to deal with. And now is as good a time as any. I would say don't let anyone kind of, you know, do this thing where they decide, well, you can't speak about X, Y, or Z issue. You can't say this now. Now is not the time. It's nobody's job to tell us when is the time and when is not the time. And I do question people who have that flag up. The French weren't attacked. I mean, this wasn't attack on the French government. This was an attack on individuals who lost their lives because of what's probably about to be some sort of proxy war. You know, may even be headed to World War III. But, you know, I think you can express empathy for the French people who lost their lives without actually supporting this country and everything that is done. And so that's just my 2 cents worth.